All right, so sociological generational studies. The data I'm talking to you about today is not the anecdotal generational stuff that was passed down from the trial lawyers in front of us to us. This stuff is based upon demographic research and forensic psychological applications. So let's talk about Gen X. Gen X, born between 61 and 81, their ages now are 33 to 53. And they call Gen X because they don't have any of those, they didn't have any of those generational cohorts that bound them all together. There were no big events during that period of time like 9/11 or like Pearl Harbor, anything like that that bound them all together. So they came up with no strong self-identification. Now, let me tell you about Gen X. They became the target. They were the perfect target of tort reform. They are your major tort reformers. And we'll see that as we go through. Their social phenomena, these people started out with a disrespect for law because they had the highest divorce rates, they had dwindling education, they had the highest crime rates in American history. And so they started out with disrespecting the divorce laws and therefore disrespecting the laws. They really, in terms of their stability, they really want stability. They seek stability. They think stability is important. This is the first generation that actually stayed home longer. They stayed home longer than any previous generations. And they're closer to their parents. And they postponed independent living. This was the group that went back home after college. The average Gen Xer was staying home until they were 28 years old. As opposed to previous generations, the boomers were leaving home, they were going off to college or going off to the military, and they'd never come back. But in this case, Gen X came back home. 51% admire their parents the most of anybody. I guess it's because they let them live at home until they were 28. But they take responsibility for their aging parents because they're still living in the house with them. All right, now here's a big deal on Gen X, self-reliance. Both parents were outside the home, in many cases working. They grew up extremely independent, and the Reagan social cuts cut them first. They were the ones, when Reagan came in and took the knife and cut everything, they cut off all those social cuts for this generation. So these people came up with the idea, or they grew up with the idea of self-reliance. If I don't take care of myself, nobody's going to take care of me. What does that lead to? The number one theme in the courthouse today is personal responsibility, because these people, this generation, they came up with the whole idea that if I don't take care of myself, nobody's going to take care of me. So they also think, as a juror, if you don't take care, you're not doing anything for yourself, so why should I do anything for you? So it wasn't that they devised tort reform and tort reform happened to hit this group. What happened was you had these people, you had this generation out there, and when Karl Rove and the other people involved in the forces of evil went out and started doing focus groups, they were focusing these people. So when they devised tort reform was devised with messages that would fit Gen X. So that's why you'll see it develops very clearly here that self-reliance is the biggest theme. They had no reliance on the government because the government, they cut their social. They had to take care, it's really water, oh, here we go. They had to take care of their own health care, and they had no deference to authority. They didn't care anything about the government because the government was doing absolutely nothing for them. So think how different this is now. And this is the theme now. You hear any of this? Do you see any of this these days in politics? Employment. No security, no confidence, and security to these folks meant having their own business. This was the first generation in American history. I mean, these folks got pounded. Gen X got pounded. It's the first generation in American history that actually had declining wages. They made less money than their parents, which is why they were back home living with their parents, even after college. So these people, their politics, post-Nixon, they were the weakest attachment to politics. Why? Because they didn't think politicians would do anything for them. The government couldn't be relied on for anything. They had the lowest voter participation for the same reason. No belief in politicians, especially after all the debacle with Nixon. They really resented being tagged on the cover of Time magazine as Generation X. The characteristics, socially, they were more diverse, they were more tolerant, and they were very much more acceptance of people who were not like themselves. Gen X women, greatest importance, the importance of the home and family. Really heavily, if you've got Gen Xers, if you've got damage to a family, if you've got injury to a family, you got loss of a father, loss of a mother, loss of a husband, wife, or child, these people, that resonates with these folks because they are very, very family oriented. Now, their conservative mentality, which is classic with tort reformers, they were much more conservative than their previous generation, and they absolutely rejected blind liberalism of the 60s and the boomers in front of them. They rejected the anti-corporate mentality. We used to stand up with boomers. We're trying cases to boomers. We'd stand up and begin the opening with, this is just another typical case of a corporation placing financial income ahead of the safety of their employees or customers, whatever it was. You couldn't do that today. That would not be a good opening today because these people are skeptical towards the anti-corporate mentality. So they became perfect targets for tort reform. Now, I want you to notice the reason we're separating these out is because the millennials are different. The millennials are different, and you think back to this when we get to the millennials. So these were the perfect targets for tort reform, they were raised as tort reformers. Personal responsibility was the biggest theme. It was out there constantly. They believed the rhetoric because Rove and the guys figured out how to talk to them. They focused them, and they gathered information from them, and then they messaged that information, and they turned around and fed that information back to them. And they fed it to them over and over and over. So the whole thing about frivolous lawsuits, frivolous malpractice cases, that was the language of Generation X. Generation X thinks greedy trial lawyers is one word. It's so the conservative skepticism. They rejected the boomer rhetoric regarding, listen to this, cheering for the underdogs, which the boomers did. The Clintons. Clinton got a lot of mileage identifying with the underdogs, identifying with the downtrodden. Okay, that's rejected by Generation X. The evil corporate America was rejected. They don't believe corporate America is evil. For one reason is because in their generation, more and more money started to be paying into 401ks, and more of their salaries started to be invested in corporations. Their savings became invested in corporations. So they gained a financial interest as the stock market expanded far beyond just the rich, or just people who invested for a living, and Mr. and Mrs. Middle America became inextricably interwoven with the stock market. Then all of a sudden corporate America became good because these are the guys who are creating my future. So that's why it became tougher to sue corporations. Equality for all, that's just boomer rhetoric. That's way too idealistic. So these folks are the perfect tort reformers, and you got to hand it to them. They've done a very effective job. The AIDS crisis created conservative and cautious mentality, and they're cautious throughout. They were also, though, they learned best through imagery, but they don't respond. They're just conservative. So they just don't learn they reject flashy advertising and things of that nature. Now, they're cynical. They're very cynical. They believe more in UFOs than in receipt of their Social Security. Does that sound like anything you hear if you ever watch Fox News? 25. I was amazed by this statistic. Only 25% regard themselves as religious. That is a very, very low number. But these folks just felt rejected by everybody. So here's how you communicate, things to take in mind when you're communicating with them. They have high regard for long-established traditions. So what you want to do with these folks is you want to talk about rules. You want to talk about traditions. So if you're trying the malpractice case, you want to wrap your client in the Hippocratic Oath and the violation of the Hippocratic Oath by the defendant. First, do no harm. And they will respond to any type of rules that are rules that are grounded in long-held traditions. Secondly, they're persuaded by themes dealing with such as rules of the road, regulations. Now, this is even more so. This is where they're very much like the millennials, because these folks are raised with rules. Everything they do is done with rules. So when you're talking about a med-mal case, you talk about protocols. You talk about the violation of protocols, the violation of standards, the violations of rules. When you're talking about driving, you're talking about the rules of the road, but don't just talk about it. Put it up on the screen. Let them see it. Let them look at the rule. When your expert talks about what the rule is, show them what the rule is. Show and tell on the rule. And then talk about the rule, the purpose of the rule, how they violated the rule, and the result of them violating the rule. Rules resonate with these people. They relate to themes that appeal to their pragmatism, and this is their kind of their mantra: hope for the best, plan for the worst. They resonate to themes that deal with their big theme is self-reliance. They were raised with self-reliance. So if you represent a plaintiff who is severely injured, and as a result of his or her injury, they are no longer self-reliant. They have to rely on somebody else to help them to get around, to help them to move, to help them. And of course, the worse the injury, the more these people would respond to it. If you talk about not the fact that they are completely dependent on someone else, but you compare it to how self-reliant your plaintiff was before versus how their self-reliance has totally been lost, because self-reliance is critical to Gen X. So it's damage to self-reliance will resonate with these folks. They mistrust boomers, but they have a close relationship with their own parents, and they place family and quality of life above a career. More than any other generation, they reject whiners. Never refer to your client as a victim, and never put your client on the stand and have them whine about how much it hurts and where it hurts. What you should be really, this is for everybody, not just Gen Xers, but you should be proving up that your client is doing the very best they can with what they have left. My theme is always courage in a personal injury case. I try to demonstrate the courage that my client has. They have this was their life before, this was their life as a result of these horrible injuries, but they're facing it with courage. They're not seeking sympathy. They're not whining. They're facing it with courage. And this is the third life they're going to have, so it's going to be the rest of their life. So talk about courage as a theme, as opposed to trying to get sympathy. The Xers are cautious and practical, and they don't respond to hyperbole, drama, or overstatement. And they will listen for that. Remember, these are the tort reformers. These are the people that are taught that you're going to stand up there and you're going to lie to them right off the bat. That you're greedy trial lawyers, and from the minute you stand up in front of one on voir dire examination or opening statement, they're going to be expecting hyperbole from you. And if you deliver hyperbole, then you're going to be playing right directly into the theme that they've been taught. Yep, greedy trial lawyers. It's important to, so with that in mind, instead of just hyperbole, you have to support your claim substantively. It's a conscious mind evidence, which is hard evidence. And when it comes to this, you have to sequence properly. Sequence your evidence. Put your hard evidence in first. The hard evidence are numbers, things they can see, x-rays, real medical evidence that you have, the documents, things that they can see and feel and touch, not the physical pain, mental anguish, that sort of thing. You've got to establish your liability in the mind of these people first. You've got to establish it substantively, and then you have to support it. But you have to support it substantively early in the game, because remember, you're not starting on a level playing field with Generation X. You're starting with people that think you're going to be giving them hyperbole. So that's why it's so important to support it with substantive evidence.